Welcome back, friends. I originally made long form educational content videos and they did decently within the Litecoin community, but I wanted to make shorter form content that is more mass appealing, where I break down topics from questions that I get asked all the time from my in real life friends and from people online. A lot of them say, hey, yeah, this makes sense from a long term perspective, but why is nobody else saying that? Like, people have this psychological tendency to just follow someone who they think is more credible uh, and knows more than them. That's like the natural human tendency. And if everyone keeps moving towards this, I think it's mass delusion, mass misunderstanding, that's just pulling people in. It's very hard to resist that, especially if you see in financial markets price on a relative basis underperforming. And so this first video is going to be on why nobody's talking about Litecoin. So I have the Google search interest data right in front of me for the entire history of Litecoin. And there are a couple of points to make on this. The first is obvious. Like, yeah, interest is super low for Litecoin. Now that can be either bearish, right? If Litecoin actually is useless, um, the market eventually gets to the truth. You never see a resurgence in interest because there's just no reason for people to fundamentally demand the thing that's trailing off in search interest. Or it can represent the exact opposite, right? The speculative market, not, or the pool of people looking at crypto just aren't interested in it despite uh, its improving fundamental picture. And that's where opportunity lies. There is money trend following, but ultimately, I think the vast majority um, will net out even or down by following popular influencers. And that's because most of this game is zero sum, at least in the casino side of this market. Right, so the first point I want to make on why Litecoin search interest is low is to help you understand the dynamics of what's been driving the growth of this casino. And really, I think of this whole market like a momentum-based trade, right? Very little fundamental analysts out there, little end consumer demand where people are actually demanding these cryptocurrencies on a daily basis. Most of it all is just gambling. And what's driving it, the same thing that has been driving it since 2017, is you have this huge incentive to create a new token because it costs you nothing. You can print it yourself. You can give it out to influencers and say, hey, this is the next big thing. Market it to your entire audience as great. And that can lead people to believe, the audience, because they see price go up. It trains them psychologically just to follow whatever the influencer is pushing. Even if at the end of the day, when the market blows up, there's no real demand by end consumers to use the thing. That's what's happening. That's why these cycles are like giant pump and dumps, because the market's been trained to follow the influencers that have weight over over public perception, and they can convince people out of price momentum that that they should buy whatever they're selling. And it's kind of unfortunate, but that's the way it's been going. It's true in almost all the coins, including Bitcoin, um, where there's massive amounts of marketing and very little fundamental growth. It's even gotten so extreme that nobody in BTC only land talks about the end value proposition really anymore. And most of the talk is about who's going to buy Bitcoin next. There's no talk about why they're going to demand it other than number always goes up because of fixed supply. I've broken down why that's not true in the slightest. It doesn't matter, fixed supply or not. Ultimately, it's the value prop demanded that will drive long-term price appreciation. And without that, it will go nowhere. So we've identified, yeah, Litecoin's had the lowest search interest basically in a decade versus coins like XRP that you hear people talking about right now. They're seeing new highs in search interest and basically an all-time high in price. But to me, the greatest opportunity, like I said before, is spotting the divergence between like the popular opinion and what the truth is. So the truth of what Litecoin is that it's another Bitcoin chain. I mean, a lot of people in the Litecoin community will argue that it's subjectively better, and maybe in some cases you can argue that, right, with privacy enabled through MWeb, with slight, 75% faster block times, so 2.5 minutes versus 10 minutes, or that's 3x. So Bitcoin blocks are Litecoin blocks are 75% shorter, is what I meant to say. But anyways, there's these subjective characteristics that you could argue are better in some cases. But I think fundamentally the reason it's growing, and I've thought this since before Litecoin started getting adoption, was because it was basically the same thing as Bitcoin. And I thought from the beginning Bitcoin would not scale. And it doesn't, despite all the people who own Bitcoin telling you it does. It really doesn't. If it did, you would be seeing massive growth in transactions, in Lightning Network adoption, because it has hundreds of millions of dollars in funding. Yet it went nowhere. It practically failed. So I think by this point, if after 10 years of talking about scaling Bitcoin, it didn't result in anything, you have to assume it's not going to ever. And that's because a decentralized network doesn't scale. The way permissionless money actually scales is horizontally through multiple chains. It's hard for people to put their heads around because it's never happened in a money before, but that's the way it's been working, and I don't know why you'd bet against the trend. That's different than a price trend, because people will argue that Litecoin price is going down and that it will never go up. Just follow the trend. And I'm saying no, ignore the popular trend that's voting on prices in the short run. Follow the actual trend in network adoption, because that's what supports price over a long enough time frame when all the speculators leave because they realize Bitcoin is something other than what they thought it was. So because Litecoin interest is lower than it has been in history, despite all-time highs in network activity, that's divergence as long as this trend continues. And the odds of this trend continuing are near 100% if demand for Bitcoin, not BTC, but Bitcoin, permissionless money, increases. Because of the way monetary network effects work, you see consolidation around dominant monies. That's what you've seen throughout history. That's how dominant monies emerge, right? The higher network effect money has higher utility. People will continue to adopt that over competition if it's not meaningfully different in terms of its value proposition. That's what Bitcoin maximalists argued at first, but what's different in a decentralized network is that it doesn't scale, right? So you'll just get another chain. Um, so again, the important point is that we're at all-time lows basically in search interest, yet prices grinding up against resistance. And if it gets a high time frame breakout, because almost nobody believes in it or understands Bitcoin itself, the market should move closer to align with the reality instead of the popular sentiment of BTC only, or government adoption. They will eventually, I know for sure, they'll eventually get to the truth. The useless stuff, like meme coins, will eventually go to zero. The useful stuff that end consumers actually demand will see increasing prices. And there will be this leveling out. Some things are extremely overvalued, others extremely undervalued, like the .com era. Um, and I think that's the way you have to look at investing or speculating, unless you're a professional trader, which there's 1% basically succeed. You have to look at this from a long-term growth perspective. So the next point I wanted to make, as far as popularity goes, is there are good reasons why nobody's talking about Litecoin. The first is that there's no marketing budget for Litecoin. The way this market has worked historically, really since 2017, is it's been a growth in a speculative gambling casino. And what's been most successful and the highest incentives are aligned with token creators that can print tokens and give them out to influencers that they know have a decent sized audience, pump them with a new narrative of how XYZ technology is going to disrupt things. The end consumers retail won't ever look through the technology. They don't know. They'll just believe the narrative. And when they see price as validation of that truth or mistruth in this case, they'll tell, their friends about it. You'll see this pump and dump thing, right? That's why you see some coins go up 100x and then deflate. Um, that is what has been happening since 2017. It's just been repeated over and over again until the market's become so saturated with random coins that there's not any more demand. There's not enough demand to sustain, infinite new token creation. So that's reason one. It's just impossible for marketing or Litecoin marketing to compete with all these big money, big group influence that wants to pump and dump stuff. Um, and this market is competing for the same pool of capital, uh, right? That's why tokens are, these token communities are all arguing and hating on each other because they know they're competing, whether consciously or not. They're all competing for the same pool of retail, speculative, or institutional speculative capital. That's why Sailor's always arguing about one chain only or BTC only, and then Ethereum maxis are arguing something. All of this infighting is due to competition. But really, competition breeds the best outcome for the end consumers. And again, ultimately what will drive price is fundamental network adoption. So to summarize this video, and I wanted to put these out pretty quickly, is that this is the largest opportunity in cryptocurrency history, probably ever. It's the most, right, if this thesis is correct, right, that Litecoin has these entrenched network effects and that it will continue to lead adoption of proof of work permissionless money, given that network effect lead, its upside is as high as BTC, so in BTC terms, 0.25. And Bitcoin almost has no room for growth and is priced at this extreme speculative premium above its organic adoption. I know nobody's talking about it, and I know that people might think I'm not credible or that all these other people know more than me. But I'm telling you, I was the only one that had this idea in 2017. I convinced the Litecoin community to adopt this second Bitcoin chain narrative in 2021 with a lot of resistance. And I do think that when price breaks out, this narrative will be extremely compelling. Right? People want to make money. They're not going to speculate on a super overvalued chain if they believe it's overvalued. Right? They'll look for growth. And Litecoin's the only chain positioned to capture that next wave of permissionless money demand. So I'll leave you with that. I would say ignore the popular influencers, and if you think this idea is correct, position yourself accordingly.